Are Blood Elves really that much better than Alliance Paladins in TBC? Yes. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe. Okay, jokes aside, there's more differences between the two factions than you can see from a first glance, and I know at this point people are going to say TBC isn't confirmed yet, it's still so early, but Ian did an interview just the other day, and in response to the question about classic TBC, he had this to say.
Can we expect Burning Crusade?
Yeah.
Nothing to announce right now, but yes, that's certainly one of the options we're considering. I think we'd be foolish not to.
That sounds pretty positive to me. Back to the video though. When people compare Alliance and Horde Paladins, they're pretty much always only referring to Seal of Blood and the fact it does more damage. There's more to it than that, quite a bit more in fact. Before we go on though, and this isn't specific to Paladins I know, but it's such a massive difference that you can't really ignore it. That's Arcane Torrent. This is the racial Blood Elves receive in TBC, an instant cast 2-second AoE silence that generates some mana back depending on your stacks of mana tap. And I'm pretty much going to point out how completely broken this racial is at every given opportunity, because it was and probably will be again come TBC. Silences aren't subject to diminishing returns either until Wrath of the Lich King, so the more elves the better. This is especially useful for PvE for protection paladins. In TBC, Avenger's Shield doesn't silence, it dazes, which honestly sometimes is kind of an inconvenience because it only hits 3 targets, so it separates out mob packs as they run over to you, meaning you've got threat on a few targets but not on all of them. This is kind of mitigated by the fact your taunt can hit 3 targets at once though, but still. Mana Tap, the often forgotten part of Blood Elves Racial, is an instant cast and it's 30-yard range, meaning Horde Paladins effectively have a ranged instant cast ability used to pull. Granted, it does next to no threat, but Alliance Paladins cannot match this, and sometimes Avenger's Shield is a risk to bounce the wrong way and chain pull, and the safest way usually is just a misdirection from a hunter. Arcane Torrent on top of that being an AoE silence is honestly the best way to stack up annoying caster mobs into a nice ball so your DPS can start blasting. You can't underestimate the power of that instant cast action, especially when it's only on a 2-minute cooldown. That's going to be available every other pull on heroic dungeons, where this racial is really strong. And even then there's PvP, which is great for much of the same reasons. That extra added CC for Blood Elves makes them much more competitive, and that's without even considering higher burst from Seal of Blood, but we'll get onto that later. Moving on, let's talk about the seal that the Alliance received, a Seal of Vengeance. And just so we all know how it works, you attack and you have a chance to apply Holy Vengeance, a damage over time effect that lasts 15 seconds and stacks up to 5 times. In patch 2.2, an instant holy damage component was added as well, so it didn't just feel like you were purely auto-attacking once you hit 5 stacks. The Judgment did more damage depending on how many stacks you had. Now it's important to know this ability does holy damage in both parts, the dot and the Judgment, and it's not directly tied to how good your weapon is. Also, dots didn't scale with haste at this point either, so it meant that it scaled with spell power alone. Haste could get it to 5 stacks faster because faster auto-attacks, but that wasn't really the issue. The issue was that it just didn't scale well, and only protection could effectively make use of it in combat. And that's kind of just in raids as well. There were niche scenarios where Ret could stack this up prior to a boss getting a debuff, but by and large it was only used by protection. In dungeons, combat didn't tend to last long enough to get 5 stacks on different mobs before they were down. In raids, if you're tanking, you want that big threat output straight away that Seal of Righteousness can do when combined with Avenger's Shield and Avenging Wrath. When you off-tanked, you had time to get stacks, but you might have still lagged too far behind on threat doing this. Come later raids, Vengeance still did have a slight edge, where you could get it stacked up and keep it at 5 stacks. This was more mana intensive of course, since you only wanted Vengeance and then judging at 5 stacks and then autoing with Righteousness up. This was the part where Alliance had benefit over Elves, albeit a relatively small one. Also, Vengeance messes with rogues in PvP. If you bring a fast weapon to get it applied, it's a damage over time. It's something. I'm trying hard to find benefits here, okay? So Alliance would have been slightly ahead in PvE for protection, but honestly I think because of Arcane Torrent, Blood Elves just end up being better. Moving on to Retribution then, this is the big one people concern themselves with. This is where the real gap is. How much is the gap? Many sources stay up to 15%, but I think that may be on the high end. When people talk Ret in TBC, they compare Seal of Blood to Vengeance. This is the wrong comparison to make. Alliance Ret doesn't use Vengeance, they use Command. Vengeance suffers from the issues we went over earlier, like poor scaling, no reliance on weapon damage. Command does scale better. Now, just to get these two abilities side to side, they both kind of work in weird ways. As you can see, both have an on-hit effect that does a percentage of weapon damage as holy. For Command, this holy damage is treated as if it were physical, but ignores armor, if that makes sense. So it can be blocked, dodged, parried, etc. as normal melee attacks can. It scales with holy damage increases, like Seal of the Crusader or Sanctity Aura, but not with spell power. Seal of Blood does damage if your weapon hits, but can be partially resisted like spells. Both of the judgments do scale with spell power and are treated as spells. As far as I'm aware, that's how these will work in TBC. And as you can see on the tooltips, Command has a chance to apply that extra damage, whereas Blood is applied with every single attack. So you may think it's down to RNG then, and Alliance Rets just need to get lucky. That's wrong. Command isn't as down to chance as it makes out. It works on a proc per minute system based upon your weapon speed. It has a maximum of 7 procs per minute. This means as Alliance you want the biggest, slowest weapon you can get your hands on, because no matter what, Command is only going to proc 7 times per minute. You want a slow weapon anyway because the proc chance is a percentage of your weapon, but this is just another good reason. Why is this bad? Because it doesn't scale with haste. And as we progress in TBC, haste becomes more and more of a valuable stat. Seal of Blood, however, scales exceptionally well with haste. It's on every attack after all, and as haste values get higher, Blood only pulls further and further ahead of Command. Oh, and the Judgment does more damage against non-stun targets, and it costs less mana, because why not? Also, just to link this around to Prot and why Blood doesn't matter there, is because A, you kind of don't want to be doing damage to yourself while you're tanking, B, you're probably using a spell damage weapon, which normally have weak melee stats so they don't accidentally become best in slot for physical damage dealers, and Blood scales from weapon damage, and C, Righteousness scales infinitely better with spell power, which is your main concern for threat. So I haven't touched on that point yet. Seal of Blood deals damage to the Paladin. Surely this is a bad thing. Well, funnily enough, actually no, it works in the Paladin's favour. Now, I'm not saying it's always going to be a good thing, but the damage is very negligible overall, and it's rarely going to actually put your life in danger very frequently. So Paladins get this passive called Spiritual Attunement. Both Horde and Alliance get this thankfully. When you are healed by others, you get 10% of that healing as mana. Amazing. This simple trick made Protection a real tank that didn't go out of mana in 30 seconds. However, as for Ret, it's also good. Total side note here, but prior to patch 2.1, this counted for overhealing, so you could just put all your Paladins in a group with a Shadow Priest, and their Vampiric Embrace and Vampiric Touch would feed them all basically infinite mana, as they double dip from Vampiric Touch mana and Vampiric Embrace overhealing mana. But that ended up getting nerfed for kind of obvious reasons. Holy Paladins never went so you actually needed to be healed to get the mana regen now. Well, fortunately for Horde Paladins, Seal of Blood makes them need healing, so they're going to get some mana back through that, as well as the usual means. Alliance, well, just hop in some fire occasionally. I'm sure the healers will understand. Seal of Command also changed up what kind of loot Alliance Ret wanted to get their hands on, sort of for the worse actually. Since haste was weaker as a stat, Alliance were more interested in getting their auto attacks and Crusader Strike hitting hard. This means they look for strength, crit and armor pen, after of course your hit and expertise count, meaning you are in direct competition for certain items versus Fury Warriors. This also sometimes meant items with no intellect on them at all, so on top of restoring less mana, you had less mana. This wasn't a problem for Horde Ret Pallies to as greater of a degree. Finally, I know, I'm surprised how long this has gone on too, we have Seal Twisting, which is taxing on both factions' mana bar to do, needs support from your raid setup and consumables either way, but Blood Elves have access to more mana, making it more accessible. So due to the 1.11 Seal of Command changes so it benefits from the Vengeance talent, Seal Twisting became much more of a thing. The basics of it is this: have Command active, swap to Blood just before you hit, the command proc will buffer and still land because of the implemented delay, so then you'll gain the benefit of both seals on one swing. This is of course RNG dependent. After that, judge Blood before the swing time is up, back to command, 2 swings, back to Blood, repeat. You have to consider not clipping Crusader Strikes with auto attacks as well, meaning it is quite high skill to pull off, but can reward a sizable increase in DPS. Alliance are using command by default, so they have the choice of, well, nothing to be honest. Seal of Vengeance and Righteousness need spell power, remember. Blood Elves get 2 seals that scale with weapons, so twisting on Alliance is just kind of making life difficult for yourself for a very negligible increase. Alliance do get Drain Eye right though, so you have the chance of getting that free 1% melee and spell hit if you're in the same group of them, or one of them yourself. Also Shockadin like Seal of Vengeance. That's something, right? Right, on top of the drain, our human obviously have perception, which can be very useful at some point for detecting stealth mobs like in Shattered Halls, and dwarves still have stone form, which is obviously fantastic for getting rid of a whole host of different debuffs, but at the end of the day those are more utility for the paladin. The Arcane Torrent kind of tops them all. It's just such a great tool for repositioning mobs and casters so easily. Well, there you go, that's about everything I could think of between the two factions. Not everything is just purely down to the paladins themselves though, you have to factor in the racials too as well I think. Either way, Alliance definitely get the short end of the stick here, whichever way you look at it really. Retribution could do much better performance wise in TBC than in Classic with correct gearing and support. It's not going to be topping meters all the same, but it's normal to want to perform well in any competitive environment like raiding or PvP. And when the game holds that back from you a bit, it can be frustrating. Come the start of Wrath of the Lich King, both faction was giving the opposing seal, just renamed, so Alliance got Seal of the Martyr, Horde Seal of Corruption, before it eventually changed entirely in 3.2 to both factions just having a buffed up version of Seal of Vengeance that pretty much combined what the two seals did into one. And even though the start of this video was a bit of a joke, it was the short version of this. Yes, Blood Elves are considerably better in TBC. After hearing all of this, hopefully it sheds some light on why. If there's anything you think I missed off, you can let me know below. And as always, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all in the next one. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye.